I'm Mark Henderson. Here are a few words about my newly published novel, Perilaus 2. A crime novel is an abstract torture instrument. It generates situations in which characters suffer, in some cases terminally. Perilaus 2 isn't a crime novel as such. It's a novel about a novelist writing a crime novel and becoming rather too involved in it. Why the title? Well, there's a Greco-Roman legend about a brilliant metalworker called Perilaus, who made a hollow life-size model of a bull from bronze. It was a beautiful work of art, but it was designed as an instrument of torture. According to the legend, Perilaus was punished for his cruel invention by being confined to the bull himself, but then he was taken out of it while still alive and thrown over the cliff. The protagonist narrator of Perilaus 2, Doug Carmichael, is trying to write his 5th crime novel, to be called The Bronze Bull. It features a foot-long bronze replica of the Bull of Perilaus, allegedly excavated from the place where the original Perilaus is supposed to have lived and worked. Though maybe it's a fake. It's stolen by an unscrupulous archaeologist and museum curator and sold to a dealer in antiquities. The dealer is murdered and the bull disappears. Therein lies the core of the plot of Doug's novel. It's a whodunit. But is the murder related to the bronze bull, as the evidence implies, or is there an unrelated motive? In either event, the bronze bull acts as a focus, even as a major character. Doug struggles to write the murder chapter because he's grown to like the victim. He finally manages to compose a draft of this chapter with the aid of a bottle of single malt whisky. In the morning he awakes with a brutal hangover to find he's been transported by unknown means into the world of his unfinished book. How will his presence as an active agent in the story he's writing affect its development? How much control will he have over the evolution of the plot and the behaviour of his characters? How can he escape from his story and return to his real life? Perilaus 2 has 2 endings revealed simultaneously. The murderer in Doug's novel The Bronze Bull is identified, and the reason for Doug's disappearance in the novel he's writing and his means of escape from it are revealed. There's a deep connection between these 2 endings. Perilaus 2 reflects on the relationship of author to manuscript and more generally on the relationship of creator to creation from aesthetic, moral and even theological perspectives. But this is done lightly. The main purpose of Perilaus 2, as of any novel, is to entertain readers. If some of the allusions are missed, it won't spoil the enjoyment of the story within a story. Nevertheless, it won't surprise me if many readers wonder whether the model bronze bull of Doug's novel exerts a malevolent supernatural influence over his characters. This is the opening chapter of my novel Perilaus 2. The corner seat was secure. The angle of the walls guarded my back. I could see all the other customers, and the conversations at nearby tables seemed innocuous. Gordon Brown had upset multinationals by closing a tax loophole. A woman planned to buy the 3rd Harry Potter book for her grandson's Christmas, and a couple debated whether they should be concerned about the so-called millennium bug. I could have answered them, but they were strangers. Steam from coffee cups, gossiping mouths and wet coats clouded the cafe window. Through a gap in the mist, I watched a tramp shuffle along the pavement, shouldering a sandwich board. The end of the world is nigh. For a moment I imagined he was Seamus Goldstein, destined to be found with the murder weapon. But Seamus belonged to my embryonic story, the tramp with the sandwich board to the real world. By the time my mind had registered the distinction, he'd disappeared. The condensation had coalesced. The window was veiled again. Embryonic story. My ability to write had deserted me since Linda had gone. To be specific, I couldn't face chapter 6, where Peter would be murdered. I'd grown to like Peter. I didn't want him to die. But you can't write crime fiction without a murder. I glared at my laptop. The laptop glared back. I finished my coffee and sidled out of the cafe. The rain had stopped. October sunshine graced Edinburgh's streets. Perhaps if I spent the rest of the morning in a green space, breathing fresh air, the channel of creativity might be unclogged. Perhaps. Making sure I wasn't followed, I headed for the Botanic Gardens. Here was a refuge from plot and subplot, conflict and menace, the valley of the shadow. For a halcyon interlude, the real environment was more alluring than the shadow world of my nascent story. Lawns and shrubberies and arbours, a haven in the heart of the city. In the middle distance, elderly citizens inspected manicured arrays of rock plants and exotic bushes. Women with squalling children fed squirrels. A football shirt, bulbous with abdomen, jogged along the path, and an anorak surmounted by spectacles appraised the treetops and scribbled on a clipboard. Seated on the damp grass, I let my body recline against a tree. A reassuring chestnut, not the species that had ruined my favourite song. Brunnen von dem Tor, beside the stream at the gate. I wonder, I mused, what those two are talking about. The couple were in their early 20s. They wore jeans and trainers and what I believe are called combat jackets. A piercing, or was it an unsavoury secretion, sparkled on the girl's nose. The chestnut rustled its bronzed leaves and bestowed an ambivalent smile. A few months earlier, Linda and I had ambled along that path through the water garden. The laptop reclaimed my attention. Peter and Karen were more important than the young couple. Peter owned property and rents poured in. However, there was another source of money, an unmentioned source, and Karen, brilliant, incisive Karen, bit her lip and asked no questions. This should have been a wellspring of tension. Tension drives a novel. My manuscript was as tense as a soggy napkin. "Doug, you English git, where have you been?" Startled, I saved the file, shut down the laptop and struggled to my feet. My jacket shed dead leaves and fragments of bark. George wasn't a threat, but it could have been anyone. "Keeping a low profile. What brings you here on a Friday?" "Kid's half-term. I'm taking a couple of days." He nodded at the laptop. "You in?" I scanned the gardens, made a non-committal noise, and asked, "Sally and the kids with you?" "Hits quarter with their granny. Taking them to the pictures later. Sal's in the tea house." His head signals direction, give or take 30 degrees. "Coming?" George led. I followed. He was a hard-bitten accountant who played prop forward, big enough to pick me up in one hand and break me in half with the other, but a gentle giant. Too soft with the children, especially Jackie, who wrapped him round her little finger. Sally, half his size, administered family discipline. They were two of my oldest friends. They'd been lifesavers when Linda left. Have you seen her again, Doug?" I saw her whenever I closed my eyes, whenever my hair-trigger imagination moulded a passing woman into her shape. A fold in the linen, the murmur of a brook, a fleeting perfume, and I saw her again. Above all, I heard her voice, speaking, singing. No, I lit a cigarette as we walked. Awkward for one carrying an inspirationless laptop and a cartload of sadness. Aye, well, Sal, we were thinking we should invite you round for dinner again soon. Most people I knew at Edinburgh had been Linda's acquaintances before I met them. I no longer wished to see them. I'd known George and Sally before I met Linda. They didn't like her. Sally wants me to meet someone new. Aye, maybe. He gave a slight laugh. Guy, lives down the stairs for us, artist. You've met Guy? No, and I'm not that way inclined. Oh, no, I didn't mean that, you daft bastard. He's got a sister, Isabel, likes your books. Read all 4 of them twice over. Wonders why the first one's still the best, mind you. Thinks you need a wee push. A push to restore the lost muse. Ah. So I have a fan club of 1. I'm honoured, but I won't be interested. Dinner would be good, though, thanks. Couple of weeks? Maybe that would give me time to transcend Chapter 6 and manoeuvre my characters towards their intended fates. I threw my cigarette into an azalea. Like the rest of Tourist Guide Edinburgh, the tea house was well bred and hygienic. The tables were round and white, the chairs matched. Plate glass windows, not veiled with condensation, sustained our contact with artificial nature. Sally had commandeered a table near the door, red hair aglow from recent re-dyeing. Hiya, Doug. Thought we'd seen you sitting there alone with your laptop, cheery as a wet weekend. Get yourself a cuppa. Come and sit with us. I queued at the corner and returned with baked potato, cup and saucer and teapot. George had overwhelmed a chair back to the windows. Sally tilted her head and studied me. Getting work, Doug? Couple of Russian medical articles to edit. An old colleague in Manchester wants me to run an eye over a PhD thesis. Editing work paid most of the bills, and my 4 published crime novels had paid for luxuries, but there was no pressure. I'd inherited money, and I owned my Stocksbridge flat outright. Well, technically I owned half of it, but I didn't suppose Linda would claim her share. Aye, and you're writing another book. That's good, eh? The working title was The Bronze Bull. Like its predecessors, it was set here in Edinburgh with Ian McArdle as protagonist. Ian wouldn't appear until Chapter 7, after the murder. I'd set up the main suspects and some red herrings and established what ought to be a strong subplot. But could I negotiate Chapter 6? Not very. It's as full of sparkle as forgotten beer. Aye, you'll tell us nothing about it, will you? You never told nobody what you're doing except the Wicked Witch and the rest. Just as long as it's better than your, what's it called, Cold Friction. Came with the heebie-jeebies, that yin, for all the old folk in that horrible ward. We're both kind of like Artless Dodger, though. Except in the ending. That was rubbish. You know the subtlest of cricket. The critics, well, Sal, said George. You ken what Doug's books are really about. He's told us. We'd had one of those conversations a couple of years earlier. What I like about your books, what their theme is, and I'd been drunk enough to be drawn into it. I'd told George that all novels are about people under stress, but in a crime novel, one person yields under stress and commits murder. The standard objective is to identify and apprehend the murderer, not to focus on the suffering that had led to the crime, the internal conflicts of the perpetrator. However, I always became distracted by those internal conflicts and obsessed with failures of justice. My novels weren't bestsellers. In The Bronze Bull, Karen's mental turmoil, her brilliance, her international reputation would be ignored by the justice system. In official eyes, she'd be the woman who had aided and abetted Peter, nothing more. And what would it matter that Peter was dazzling, charismatic, a good friend, though not a man to cross, and habitually loyal, though he had deserted Alison after the miscarriage, and had failed to reward David's help? Scottish justice would see only his shady dealings. So it would be for the others, Alison, David, Richard and the rest. The sum of their joys and sorrows, stresses and contradictions, virtues and vices, would weigh no more than a feather in the scales of Scottish justice. DCI Ian McCardle would understand the contradictions and stresses. He'd feel the sorrow, but he was only the instrument of justice. The instrument could be sensitive, but the wielder wasn't. And so what? I'd said it all before, 4 times. I ate my baked potato. George tells me I'm invited for dinner, Sally, and I suggested a couple of weeks. Would that be okay? We talked about their children, and about Guy the artist. Kind of wabbit looking with a moustache, said Sally, and his sister Isabel. There were no children in The Bronze Bull, or in most of my novels. I wondered why not. Sally chortled, "Oh, Doug, get an eyeful of those two." The young couple with combat jackets had entered the tea room. I'd been right about the piercing, one of several with which both bodies were mutilated. Tinny pop music leaked from their earpieces. I grimaced. George chuckled. Modern culture, Doug. Food for a writer, you know. Once upon a time, culture and vulgarity were antonyms, and emetics aren't food. I could still elicit laughter, at least when I was serious. I glanced around the tea room. Nothing obvious. But professional watchers were subtle. You sound like you're 90 when you talk like that, Doug. And you're not much older than us. Nay, kids, that's what does it. What age are you, the new? 43? No, 44 as of August past. I'd have liked kids. There was a short silence, but Sally was never slow to speak her mind. You've been let down by a selfish bitch that wasn't worth your time or your love. I ken your heart, Doug, but you're better off without her. And you need to get out more. I'm glad you're working again, but you need more stimulation, or your new book will be rubbish. I concealed a palpable hit under a smile. I'm out today, Sally. I only on the Todd till we track you doing and George hauled you in here. It's good to see you both. You're wrong about Linda, though. Saying the name clogged the thick silt of memory and clogged my throat. I coughed. I'm impossible to live with. Oh, quit beating yourself up, man, George growled. It takes 2 to make a relationship work, and don't tell me you didn't put heart and soul into it. Anyway, you don't need to wait a fortnight to come and see us in Warrender Park. Drop in whenever you want. We finished food and drink, exchanged farewells, and went our separate ways. My spirit was drawn heavenward by the beauty of the gardens and the kindness of friends, but rendered flightless by stagnant emotion and the loss of creative drive. I strolled home, cradling my laptop. 10 minutes to my flat. I resolved that after lunch I'd polish the draft of Chapter 5 and then force myself to attack Chapter 6. Blandford Terrace was as quiet as ever, but there were no trees there, no one to talk to. I could still smell the chestnut, feel the roughness of its bark, and hear the voice of its leaves. But a dryad comforts the living as a fortune comforts the dying. You can't take it with you. I scanned my surroundings. All the cars were familiar, not least my old Ford Capri, pale blue and rusting. There was a flat for sale on the opposite side of the road a few doors along. The sign was new. No other changes as far as I could see, except that the young couple with combat jackets and piercings had followed me. No, paranoia, I decided. They just walked the same way. They're not such stuff as surveillance teams are made of. I hurried inside, double-locked my door, lit a cigarette, and set the alarms.